Recently, I was asked by a close friend, why do we not see miracles today like the early church had them? Now, in the early church, you remember that they spoke with tongues, they prophesied, and they practiced healing. All right, I want to deal with those three topics. Yeah, there are many more, but basically I want to deal with the issue of healing first, then speaking in tongues, and then prophecy. On the issue of healing, well, a couple of years ago, I was extremely ill and did not know whether I was going to make it or not. Doctors pulled me through. But while I was sick, my wife and I would ask every doctor who tended to me, have you seen doomed patients recover and walk out? Every doctor said they had. Several years ago, a close friend of mine went to a hospice. He died there. But we asked the hospice personnel, do you ever have people come in here and walk out healthy? The hospice personnel said, yes. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Were these people divinely healed, or because not everything is known about the human body, does the human body sometimes have the uncanny ability to fix itself? I'll leave each of you to decide that issue for yourself. Again, we don't know all the answers, but apparently healings of a sort do occur. They might not occur as much here in the United States because in the United States, a lot of us have access to medical care. But in other parts of the world, particularly in places like Africa and Latin America, where they do not have as much medical care as we do, maybe, just maybe, they have to depend on God more for their healing than we do, and maybe they have more miracles than we do. Now, this cannot be verified. In the Far East, where Christianity is gaining a big foothold, there are reports of miracles also, but again, these reports are difficult to verify, and we cannot always tell if these events are miracles from God or just natural phenomena, especially since we do not understand all that there is to know about the human body. Turning to the issue of speaking in tongues, that's a touchy subject because there are groups who claim that they are doing it. Well, if you look at the history of the issue, speaking in tongues was a big part of the early church during the time of the apostles. And the last person we know of to speak in tongues was a man named Montanus, who was born about the time that the people who would remember the apostles were dying. And it was said that he spoke with tongues. But then, for the next 1,000 or more years afterward, we don't have any record of anyone doing it until recent times. In the 1800s, the movement started where the people began to speak in tongues. Well, are they genuine? I'm going to leave that topic for you to decide. But my take on it is that, all right, let's back up to Peter. When they all spoke in tongues on the day of Pentecost, Peter rose up and said, this is what the prophet Joel talked about. Prophet Joel, he is apparently talking about locusts coming in and devouring everything. Well, I think, now again, this is my interpretation, but I think that Joel is talking about the fifth trumpet in Revelation. In other words, he is talking about something that happens late during the tribulation. During the fifth trumpet, a plague of something, some kind of creatures come in and destroy everything in sight, and nothing can be done to stop them. This appears to be the same thing that is happening during the time of the fifth trumpet. Some creatures come in from the bottomless pit and they destroy everything in sight. Then Joel says, after this big plague of locusts, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions. Your old men shall dream dreams. And also I will pour it out on your handmaids. In other words, the rich, the poor, the middle class, the lower class, the upper class, all of them will experience the outpouring of God's Spirit. Peter said, this is that which is spoken. Well, okay. Now, my interpretation of prophecy is the prophecy was uttered at one point in the past, and then it was partially fulfilled at some time in the past. But the ultimate fulfillment of that prophecy is going to occur at a time in the future, the distant future from the time it was uttered. Now let's look at the prophecies of the coming Messiah. Most Old Testament prophets talked about a coming Messiah. Well and good, the Messiah came in the person of Jesus Christ. But that does not mean that the Messiah is not going to come again. In other words, the coming of Jesus was a partial fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies, but he did not come as conqueror and defeated the Antichrist. No, that is a prophecy that is going to happen sometime in the end. And I believe the same thing applies to the prophet Joel. On the day of Pentecost, Joel's prophecy was partially fulfilled, but it will be completely fulfilled at some time during the end, or during the end time, during the tribulation. This takes us up to the third topic of this presentation, the issue of prophecy. Paul said, despise not prophesying, and forbid not to speak with tongues. Now, there are many Christian denominations today who believe that miracles ceased with the apostles, that the gift of tongues ceased with the apostles. If the gift of tongues ceased with the apostles, how come it's going to be manifested again in the end time, or in the time that the prophet Joel speaks about? In other words, I believe that these gifts, while they might have ceased with the apostles, they were not meant to, and they should not have. They were meant for us today, and they should be practiced today. And in some circles, some people claim that they are. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether these tongue speaking that's going on today is real. But now prophecy, that is another matter. The simple test of a prophet, the real test of a prophet is, does what is prophesied about actually come to pass? If it comes to pass, he's a prophet, you should listen to him. If it doesn't come to pass, he is a fake, you should not follow him. Now there is another test for a prophet. Supposing a prophet prophesies something and it comes to pass, but then he expounds some false doctrine that you know is not according to Scripture, then you should not follow him. The gift of prophecy is neglected. However, at the time Joel spoke about, he said, your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Now here, Joel is talking about three generations, which is the normal generations that we find of human beings on earth. Though I mean, occasionally people will live long enough to see their great-grandparents, and even occasionally their great-great-grandparents, but that doesn't happen all the time. Mostly, living on earth at any one time are three generations: the children, the young people, and the old. All right, your children, your sons and your daughters, they will prophesy. The gift of prophecy is the highest gift, I believe, that God ever gave to man. The ability to know the future. When I'm playing around in the stock market, I wish I had that gift to know what the market is going to do. Regrettably, I don't. And I'm often fooled. But I wish I had it. Now, but at the time that Joel is talking about, the children both male and female, will have the ability to prophesy. The young men will see visions. In other words, here we only see the men being able to see visions, close to God, yes. The old men will dream dreams. God often spoke to people in dreams because God was maybe thinking that, well, this person is not close enough to me, or he'll not understand my voice enough, so I can only talk to him while he's asleep. If I talk to him while he's awake, I'll terrify him. Or if I talk to him while he's awake, he'll commit some sin against me, particularly the sin of being afraid, which is a sin that God does not tolerate, does not like. So, basically the picture I get is that your old men will be farther from God than your young men, but the children, the sons and daughters, will be even closer to God than the young men or the old men. In modern times, we're seeing a generation of young people who are teaching their grandparents. I heard a story a few years back of a woman who wanted to set up a Twitter account. She did not know how to set up a Twitter account, so she went to her grandson, and her grandson set her up a Twitter account. This has not happened in generations past, where grandchildren taught their grandparents. But being an old man myself, I'm not going to deny it. I can understand that, yes, my son knows more about modern contraptions than I do. And the children are learning and picking up on these things much faster than we are. And when the end time comes, I believe the children will be the ones who get closer to God than the older ones of us. Whether it be healing, speaking in tongues, or prophesying, we've got to ask ourselves, well, do we really do it like the apostles did? In other words, in a day that they spoke in tongues, there were flames of fire that appeared on the top of each of them. I imagine it appeared on their heads. Flames of fire. Where are the flames of fire today? There was a very, very rushing mighty wind. Where is the rushing mighty wind today? And who today dares prophesy? Keep in mind, in the Old Testament, if a prophet's word failed to come to pass, he was to be taken out and stoned with stones. With that in mind, that's why Jonah was so upset at God when God did not destroy Nineveh like Jonah said he would. But God said to Jonah, hey, I have pity on these people I've created. And why should I not have them? These people of Nineveh who don't even know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle. And I suppose that at that point maybe Jonah was placated. But again, keep in mind, in Jonah's day, the penalty for a failed prophecy was death. Today, the penalty for a failed prophecy is ridicule, which sometimes can hurt worse than, well, if you may say so, can even hurt worse than a stoning. And most people just don't want to run the risk. Well, again, where are the prophesyings? I want to remind you that Paul said two things here: despise not prophesyings, and do not forbid to speak in tongues. The time will come, I believe, when God's people will be driven into the wilderness. Yes, it's foretold in Revelation. And once in the wilderness, we will bump into people who also were driven into the same wilderness, but people who speak a language that we don't understand. So among us or among them, there will need to be people who have the gift of speaking in languages that they never learned, and others who have the gift of interpreting those languages that they never learned. And that way, God's people will be able to talk to each other. The separation that came about at the Tower of Babel will be overcome by the Holy Spirit. In closing, I want to say this. A lot of people who claim that they are speaking in tongues today will say that everybody must speak in tongues in order to be Spirit-filled. But Paul asks a question in one of his epistles, do all speak in tongues? It's one of those questions where that no is the understood answer. He doesn't actually answer no, but it's understood. He asks the same question, well, a similar question, do all interpret? Again, the answer is understood to be no. Do all have the gifts of healing? Again, the answer is understood to be no. But these miracles and manifestations that they talked about, I believe we're going to see again. Somewhere along the way, for one reason or another, we lost them. And I don't know why. Maybe it was because of sin. Maybe it was because of unbelief. Maybe it was a combination of sin and unbelief. But we lost them. But they will come back to us again at some time. And maybe in the not too distant future.